Hey everybody, it's Mark Vo with Voline Outdoors, continuing the series. You got a bow for Christmas, now what? Casey, this is continuing for you. We saw in the last two episodes that we could develop a 5-step method for shooting barebow that removes all left to right error by anchoring under our chin so that we can actually look straight down the arrow shaft along the left edge of the bowstring as a rear sight and use the tip of the arrow as a front sight, so that we come as close to shooting as accurately as a compound bow as an Olympic recurve archer. We're not anchoring off to our cheek where we deliberately introduce error. We saw in the previous episode that we were developing two numbers, two measurements in terms of fingers to create a gap. That gap is what determines the elevation of the arrow, which is what determines the range. What I meant by gap was we're creating a string walking gap between the nocking point of the arrow and the drawing point of our index finger. If that index finger is anchored under our chin consistently, then by adjusting that gap, we're adjusting the elevation of the arrow, we're adjusting how far the arrow travels. And we saw that you can find a very elegant way of calculating a gap on the fly for any distance. It's called the Voigtland string walking method. It requires that you memorize and learn two numbers about your bow, your arrow combination. A first initial gap that can be for 10 meters or 20 meters, take your pick, and a 10-yard or 10-meter interval gap, the amount that you adjust the initial gap in order to compensate for a change in distance. We found that a 10-meter initial gap for this 30-pound bow shooting this arrow was 3.5 fingers. 1, 2, 3.5, that distance. We also learned that the 10-meter or 10-yard interval gap was approximately 1/2 of a finger, so that if I started off with 3.5 fingers to shoot at 10 meters, then to shoot at 20 meters, I need to simply shorten this gap by 1/2 of a finger. Now we're going to continue. We saw in the last episode we were shooting successfully at 20 meters. Now let's try shooting out at 30 meters and see if this string walking method still works. That bag on the left is a 30-meter bag, 30 yards. It's close enough. It's within a couple yards. We're going to set our string walking gap with 2 steps. Step 1, we start with our 10-meter interval gap, 3.5 fingers. Now we adjust for the difference between 10 meters and 30. That's a difference of 20 meters. We have to make 2 changes with that interval gap. We go up 1/2 finger to get to 20 meters. We go up another 1/2 a finger to get to 30 meters. So that what's happening is, if I start off with this for my gap, if I go up 1/2 of a finger, that's my 20-meter gap. If I go up another 1/2 a finger, that's my 30-meter gap. Can you see how the arrow, the back of the arrow is coming down, so the front of the arrow is going up, so it's shooting farther. I'm shooting with other people at the range. I'll try to squeeze one shot in here. Let's go and set the gap for 30 meters. We start with a 3.5 finger, 10-meter gap. I need to go up 1/2 finger to get to 20, another 1/2 finger to get to 30. That's the same as going up a whole 1 finger. So that gap, 2.5 fingers, is my 30-meter gap. 5-step method after that. Step 1, choose your gap. Step 2, draw back an anchor under your chin. Step 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. That's your rear sight. Step 4, put the tip of the arrow on the center of the target. That's your front sight. Step 5, small motion release. Now you saw me talking and shooting. You never do that. Let me go pull that arrow and we're going to shoot a few more times. Okay, round 2. Let's shoot more. Let's shoot 3 arrows at 30 meters. We know now 3.5 fingers for an initial gap, up a whole finger to 2.5 fingers is our gap for a 30-meter shot. Let's put 3 more in. It's still freezing out, guys. You got to be realistic. The wind's not blowing. It's perfect like that. But it is hard to do a good release when your fingers are frozen. Still, let's try. Step 1. Now that I know it's a 2.5 finger gap, 3.5 fingers minus 1/2 minus 1/2, I may as well just count down 2.5 fingers and be done with it. Step 1, choose your gap. Step 2, draw back and anchor under your chin. 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. 4, tip of the arrow on the center of the target. 5, small motion release. A little low, but that's because I have a very thick bowstring and my nocks are holding on really, really tight right now. So they're having trouble letting go of the arrow, and it's cold weather. If I try to pry this nock wider so it loosens, so it slips off the bowstring easily, I'm going to crack the nock off because it's freezing out. So I'll just have to endure. Let's do another one. Step 1, choose your gap, 2.5 fingers. Step 2, draw back and anchor under your chin. 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. And what I mean by that is I'm looking down this left edge right over the top of the arrow, and I'm putting that tip of the arrow right smack on the center of the target. Not above, not below, not to the left, not to the right. Right smack on the center of the bag. And then I'm making a small motion release. Let's go through that. Step 1, choose your gap. Step 2, draw back and anchor under your chin. 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. 4, tip of the arrow on the center of the bag. 5, small motion release. One more shot. People are waiting. Step 1, choose your gap, 2.5 fingers for 30 meters. Step 2, draw back and anchor under your chin. 3, look down the left edge of the bowstring. 4, tip of the arrow on the center of the target. 5, small motion release. The bowstring held onto my arrow so much that it pulled back like this and then flew. Let's pull them. Clear. Oh, I'm gonna have to warm the bow up at home and put a narrower bowstring on. Clear. But you see how well this works. Casey, I want you to go out and try this now. You've been practicing at 10 meters for at least a couple of days since Christmas. So that's 10 days now, buddy. You're starting to get those muscles. Remember, you got to go 21 days, 3 weeks of practicing 30 shots a day for those trapezius muscles, those archery muscles to start working. It's not the shoulder you're using. It's the back muscles that are doing the drawing at full draw. It's those trap muscles, the rhomboids, those muscles. You're practicing, you're starting to feel stronger. I want you to feel encouraged about trying to shoot at 10 meters and 20 and even 30. But you're already starting to listen for some of the things that are going to cause you problems. 1, the weather. Cold fingers, bad release. Bad release, you miss the bag to the left or to the right. There's no controlling it. You got to go shoot indoors or keep your hands warm. Go in and out of your Jeep, whatever it takes. You got to keep your fingers warm. That's part of bearable. The second thing that you saw was if the bowstring itself is clinging on to, if the nock is clinging on to the bowstring too much, you end up with the bowstring literally pulling backwards on the arrow, influencing the flight. It can cause it to go left or right. It can certainly slow it down so it lands short. Be thinking about those things as you become a more and more proficient barebow archer. Practice at 10, practice at 20, practice at 30. If things look well at 30, great, good for you. Keep shooting at 30. It forces you to focus. It forces you to really concentrate when the target gets farther away because it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's literally 1/3 the size at 3 times the distance. That's the law of similar triangles in geometry. Go read up on it. That's it for now, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this particular episode. This is Mark Vogt with Vogtland Outdoors. We'll see you out there. Cut.